The committee will come to order. We do have a quorum and we're ready for business. Thank you, all those that are present. We appreciate your presence here in the committee meeting with us today. I'd like to start off with just a couple of preliminary things so that you know exactly what we'll be doing here this morning. As indicated last night, there will be a closing statement by those who, by Senator Cherie Buckner Webb, to be specific. She will be making a closing statement. She may or may not be asked questions by the members of the committee. We'll allow questions of her as well, and then we will proceed with the voting. Also, I think this is something that needs to be done in a very public way, and that is to thank the support staff and security and all those who have done so well in this proceeding. You've only seen a small measure of what they do here, but without them, we could not function. And so they do need our appreciation for that. The other thing that I think that I'll explain right now is that to avoid any doubt about this on the part of the committee members, there will be a roll call vote. There won't be any need to call for that because there will be a roll call vote on whatever motions come before us this morning. So with that, Senator Buckner Webb, if you would come and close this up for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the chairman and the committee, I first express my thanks for convening this hearing and for your careful and considerate attention of the testimony provided over the last 3 days. First, the bill. Just to recap. House Bill 2 updates the Idaho Human Rights Act to add that gender identity and sexual orientation cannot be used to discriminate in the areas of employment, education, and public accommodation. These are in addition to those currently called out in the Act: race, color, religion, sex, age, national origin, and disability. The bill merely adds 2 categories. It does not change what are discriminatory actions. An employer can fire or expel someone for cause. He or she cannot, however, use any of the listed characteristics called out in the Act as an excuse to do so. Should a claim of discrimination be made, there is no cause for criminal action, but rather a civil claim processed under the Human Rights Commission rules. The Idaho Commission on Human Rights has the power to receive and act on complaints, to investigate complaints, and to appear in court. Note that the Human Rights Commission has no power to prosecute. A complaint must be filed within 1 year of an occurrence. The law requires the Commission to resolve issues by informal means prior to investigation. If they cannot, a formal investigation shows an action likely caused by discrimination occurred. The Idaho Human Rights Commission shall endeavor to eliminate such discrimination by informal means, such as conference, conciliation, or persuasion. If unlawful discrimination has occurred and reconciliation efforts are unsuccessful, the Commission may file a civil action. In any civil action, the burden of proof resides with the person seeking relief. That's per the code. That means that the complainant must prove to the court that an action caused discrimination and harm. Finally, the Idaho Human Rights Act does not apply to a religious corporation, association, or society, a bona fide occupational qualification, private clubs, religious educational organizations giving preference to members, housing in duplexes or other facilities if the one providing the lease resides herein. Why is it necessary to add gays and transgender Idahoans to the Human Rights Act? Well, you've heard the testimonies. You've seen the emotion that accompanies the stories. You've listened as person after person has shared the realities of their lives without the protections afforded by this act. In the wholeness of who I am, I support House Bill 2. I stand before you as a multi-generational Idahoan. My sons represent the 6th generation of my family to live in Idaho, and my precious granddaughter, the 7th. We are on purpose Idahoans. We are not here by accident. My family has made a choice, each generation, to live and work in Idaho. I'm an African American. Many of the concerns expressed here about updating the Human Rights Act are the same ones expressed about adding African Americans or race to the Human Rights Act. I remember my parents struggling for months and months to find a house in a neighborhood of their choice, one without a covenant that excluded blacks. I'm one who remembers the celebration when we finally bought a home in my district, where I live now, in a nice neighborhood with hardwood floors and a fenced yard. I remember a year later, the interruption of our dinner one evening when a cross was burned in our front yard, a year after we moved in. I remember the police. I remember my aunt crying and sobbing. I remember grandparents insisting that we move immediately, move in with them. I remember the fear that grabbed all of the black community. I remember when the Human Rights Act was first enacted in Idaho. Just making sure there are no age comments. I remember the joy, relief, and celebration that it elicited. I remember over a decade later buying a house 9 blocks from my parents when I moved back to Idaho and having someone steal my car the first night I was in my house, drive it up the hill, and drive it over a cliff, right by what used to be the Simplot Mansion. I remember the phone calls and the nasty name calling and people telling me to take my, and I won't use the words, children, and get out of the neighborhood, a neighborhood that I'd lived in almost 30 years. I remember people in my neighborhood saying terrible things, my neighborhood. I remember worrying for my children in my neighborhood, and right here in my state, a 5th generation Idahoan. I'm a business person, and I've had a robust business life, probably equated to, again, how long I've lived. I've been a clerk. I was a long-distance operator. Who remembers a long-distance? Okay, that's all right. A singer, a global diversity manager, a marketing manager, a region procurement manager, a national business manager, the list goes on. And LGB folks were present in every environment, but most of them were secreted. My experience includes 30 years in the corporate environment and as many years in small business, working internationally in a number of disciplines, including diversity and inclusion, cross-cultural competence. I have a lifelong experience in dealing with discrimination, both personally and professionally. I have to say, when I'm working in cities across the U.S., and I say I'm from Idaho, I don't know who's more surprised, black folks or white folks. I always get a reaction, because quite frankly, there's a perception about Idaho. I've seen the looks, I've heard the comments, she's black, you know. How will she fit in? How will our clients respond to a black woman? Or after talking to one client on the phone for years, finally meeting them in person and having them say, "Oh, you're so tall." That's code, you know. And I'm wondering how the dialogue would have gone if they had known who I was. I've been privy to witnessing the value proposition for diversity in world-class business environments, recruiting and hiring and retaining the best, the brightest. I've seen robust economic development because of diversity. I've seen bottom-line results. And I'm a mother. I wear it like this badge every day. My life script has led me to this time in this place. I'm fortunate to have seen my young sons grow to manhood, and yet I've wept with mothers who have not been so fortunate. It broke my heart just recently to join in a celebration of life that cut short a life of a talented, bright young gay man due to the terror of the isms that plague our community. I've been the other, one outside the mainstream dominant culture. I know what it's like to walk in fear and uncertainty. I know what it's like to worry for the safety of my children, the people I love, for my own safety. I know what it's like to face the fear of being treated with disdain and to be diminished. I know what energy it takes to constantly be on guard. And I am proud to be your colleague. I'm honored to serve the people of the state of Idaho, to work hand in hand with you for the betterment of our state. I'm proud to be a servant of the people of Idaho, and I stand before you today, compelled to call out for the rights that some in their privilege continue to take for granted, that they would be extended to all. The right to fairness and equality in accessing education, housing, and employment, for the opportunity for all people to be treated justly with dignity and respect, to have the opportunity to fully and openly participate and contribute in our communities without fear. In the vernacular of my own cultural tradition, I have a charge to keep. That means work to do. And finally, I'm a woman of faith. I'm undergirded by an understanding of our interconnectedness as people, an inheritance of responsibility and action demonstrated by legions of men and women who came before us. I believe I have a calling. I'm supported by committed citizens from across Idaho, a powerful history of men and women who continue to strive to ensure that everyone gets a fair shake and the chance to pursue their dreams and their hopes and the opportunity to win in the workplace, in the marketplace, in their homes, to thrive. I have an abiding confidence in relationship with that power greater than myself. And finally, I'm empowered by a vision for a future, not only for the next generation, not only for my grandbaby, but rather for generations to come, because truly what we do today sets the foundation. Our friends, neighbors, family, members of the LGBT community want the opportunity to awaken every day and carry on their lives without fear. Fear of losing their homes, fear of losing their jobs, fear of losing their lives. You see, many of the same arguments, I've said this before, for denying LGBT community rights and accessing and access to other things were used to keep women and blacks out of the workplace. Well, the world is still turning, and women are in leadership positions in every arena. And by the way, I'm standing here today before you in this place, the People's House, at this time, black, female, and a woman of a certain age, and the world has not stopped spinning on its axis. I ask, what will our legacy be? It is my hope that we will endow the future. It is time to extend justice to all Idahoans, and it is my hope that we will take courageous action to end oppression and bring justice to all in our communities. In the words of my tradition, because that's what I fall back on every time, anybody that knows me, I would ask that we would be unified in our quest for justice, that we would be filled up with the spirit of unity, that our steps would be ordered, that we would be equipped for the challenges that come. It is my fervent prayer that our commitment would be increased to be inclusive, open, and understanding, that we would move forward with grace, vigor, wisdom, and compassion to unleash that power that lies within this body of committed, purposeful men and women. It is my hope that we would leave a legacy of power, passion, and purpose for generations to come. Martin Luther King said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." With that, I ask for your support for HB 2. It's fair, it's just, and it's worthy of your yes vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. House Bill 2 is properly before the committee.
Let's move on to the special hearing on the forecast.
Representative Andrus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that House Bill 2 be held in committee, and I'd like to speak to the motion, please.
I'd allow you to do so. Go ahead, Representative Andrus.
Ladies and gentlemen, I wish I could speak what is in my heart to you today. I apologize that my ability is inadequate to tell you what I feel. I am in favor of legislation. I don't think today this is that legislation. I've received probably 1,000 emails from people concerned about this issue. It is a burning issue in this state, and we need to address it. We have heard you, and I want to assure you that we will address it. but I'll tell you why I don't think this legislation is the way to address it. People, thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands of people, are concerned that their religious freedom is also being impinged and would be impinged, and their right to act would be violated to protect their religious held freedoms. We need to address those concerns as well. We have come a long way. I think this very hearing has brought us a long, long way. I wish every employer, I wish every landlord could have heard your stories. And I think they will. Through this hearing, I think they will hear your stories. Do not despair. I think we will have legislation. This is just me speaking. I'm not speaking with authority from the legislature. I think because of this hearing and because of things that have happened this week, we will have legislation. Do not despair. Your concerns are legitimate, very legitimate, and people in Idaho and in the legislature have heard you and are hearing you. You people of the LGBT community probably think, and I know you have felt, that we view you as second-class citizens and discriminate against you. I do not feel that way. The members of this committee do not feel that way. My heart goes out to you because of how you're living, the anxiety that you feel, and we will do something for you. Take heart. Don't be in despair. We will do something. But we have to address both sides. The best thing we could do is just be good people and get along. But unfortunately, there are a few who don't abide by that concept, and we have to make rules. But we have to be very careful how we make those rules. And today, my feeling is that this is not the rule that addresses the whole picture. It addresses part of the picture. But believe me, we have the ability to address the whole picture, and we will. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Senator Wintrow.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move for a substitute motion to move House Bill 2 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. I would like to speak to that.
Lady has the floor.
Representative Andrus, I know the struggle you're having. I see it and I feel it. And I just so appreciate your willingness to be honest and share the feelings that you're having. I know you're struggling. I've come to know you a little bit since I've come here, and I know you're struggling. You're a good man. I think this issue, as you've said, to be careful. I think for the last, more than 9 years, people have been very careful trying to craft approaches and language and so forth because of the despair that they're feeling and suffering. I think people have been very careful. And as Senator Buckner Webb noted, this is an addition, an update, an amendment to an existing law that we have that protects many classes. And we know that the amount of violence and denial of access to things is pervasive. And I see the struggle many of us are having. I went to see Representative Bateman, and I know he's a good man too. But the thing I've been facing is, and I had a talk today with a colleague, bless his heart, he is so wonderful, and he said, leadership is about reason in difficult times. And he was talking about growing up in Idaho during the civil rights era and having conversations in his grade school about whether black people were human beings. And he's a good man. And I think that's the conversation we're having again. These are good human beings that deserve the same rights and privileges that everybody else does. I am, as a representative for District 19, living in a densely populated area. We have many churches and many different beliefs. We know that tolerance and inclusion is the way. I am asking, and even if we vote to pass it to the floor, that would at least give it its time for everyone to vote. So even if we decided to pass it today, you wouldn't have to agree with it, you wouldn't have to condone it, but let it get to the floor for everyone to vote and weigh in. I think our state deserves that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to do an amended substitute motion. I move that House Bill 2 be sent to the floor with no recommendation to allow all House members to vote on this important issue. And may I talk to it, the motion?
Certainly.
That we have heard from 67 to 81% of Idahoans support equal rights for all in employment and housing. I think it would be responsible if we had all House members vote on this important issue. I would like to say thank you to all who did heart-wrenching testimony on both sides of the issue. I appreciate your participation in democracy in the state of Idaho. I would like to also say I've been part of a family that has been in the Idaho area since the time of when Idaho was part of the Oregon Territory and was not even a territory. So I feel like I truly am an Idahoan, and so I submit this amended substitute motion for no recommendation.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I actually just more have a statement to make.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you. First, I actually do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for doing a fine job with committee. I believe that everything has been done with due diligence, and I want to thank everyone for coming here and taking the time out of your lives with patience to be here and share your personal stories with us. It has been a great emotional process for me and for those that I know, even my family back home. When I went home last weekend, I spoke with my grandfather, who is a World War II veteran. Started off as a young farmer. And the challenging part was, I know that he's ready to go. He's in his mid-90s, and he said it's about time. So I was having a hard time with that, and I said, well, what are your thoughts about this bill that's coming up? It's going to be very heavy, a lot of heavy hearts. And he says, well, my first remembered, excuse me, my first remembered thought is my experience as a young man leaving our farm. And, we're of the First Nations. He said, we've gone back for hundreds of years, thousands of years of this land. And he said, but I was taught to always protect the inheritance of this land. And so I went off to World War II, and I fought for this country. Because he said, it wasn't just for America, but it was for our ancestry, from the lineage that we come from, because we're all God's children, he said. And America is not truly free until we're all free. So he said, granddaughter, when I went off to World War II and I came back, the first thing that I experienced were the businesses that all had signs on their front windows that said, even in our own land, no dogs and no Indians allowed. And that persisted for a while. So that was his first experience and brush with discrimination, other than the name-calling prior to. But this man, he is my mentor. He's done so much in this world that in the end, he said, ultimately, That taught me compassion. I didn't react with hate, but when I saw someone else pushing down on someone else, I stood up for them because I know what it's like, and so do you. And I've heard this word freedom being thrown around quite a bit throughout this testimony, this hearing, and it's a little frustrating because it's demeaning to me when you misuse that word freedom. It's a sacred term to me, and I would think and hope that others would use it in that sacred manner. And I want to quote my grandfather because this is what he told me. He said, when freedom means someone in government chooses who is truly free and who isn't, we and all of America are diminished. For the exercise of freedom is dictated rather than protected. If life is a test, the challenge is, can we really love our fellow man? Do we love God enough to follow him with goodwill towards all? And do we love our children enough to give them a world of peace, hope, and understanding? If government doesn't protect and provide for all, it fails. And we all fail the greater test, while some Americans are held down, spurned, and abused with the ugliest weapons of all, which are hate and ignorance. Now, my mentor, my grandfather, I love him to pieces. And when he said this to me, it was very heavy, because it is our responsibility to uphold each and every one of our freedoms. And I want to share that with my committee, my fellow colleagues, because I love each and every one of them. And I think that's good for all of us to think about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion on the amended substitute motion. Representative Bateman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My heart has been touched by this hearing. I've gotten to know you. And I know that from this point on, forever, I will be kinder and I will be more compassionate to those who bear a heavy burden. Somewhere in Scripture it says that if we are not kind to the needy and to the lonely and to the afflicted and to those who bear a heavy burden, our prayers will not be answered. And I will be kinder and I will be more compassionate. While I'll support the original motion, I'd like to go on record that I will support a compromise. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Further discussion on the motion. Representative McCrosty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fellow committee members, yesterday, after we concluded 21 hours of testimony on what will arguably be one of the most controversial pieces of legislation during this session, I had 1,000 thoughts run through my head. I think that my vote on this bill is obvious, but I want to effectively express why I support HB 2. This isn't the gay guy casting the gay vote for the gay bill. You need to know that I cast my vote in a thoughtful and deliberative manner, one that is representative of the people of my district, one that represents my constituencies, including students and teachers and parents with whom I have fought for to improve education in Idaho, and one that represents the LGBT community in Idaho. And so I hope you will indulge me in reading from my notes rather than trying to speak off the cuff and miss something that I think is important for you to hear. I'm not sure how many people here knew that I was gay before we started these hearings. I haven't hidden that fact. It's been out there when I campaigned. My husband even joined me in attending the gala night before the session began, and I introduced him to some of you. But you don't have to know that I'm gay all the time. When we're talking about important issues like addressing, improving education in our state, what you need to know is that I'm a teacher of 12 years with 12 years of experience teaching music to elementary, middle school, and high school students in both urban and rural Idaho. When we're talking about an important issue like updating the Idaho Human Rights Act, that's when you need to know that I'm gay. I understand fighting for equality issues because I deal with it daily. I don't expect Democrats or Republicans to understand the issue with the depth that I bring to the table. One of the things that I learned as I began my coming out process in accepting that I'm gay is that I will process this information faster than those around me. I have to deal with it every day because it's part of my life. My peers only have to deal with it when I'm around. So as I approach dealing with HB 2, and as I listen to opposition testimony, share statements which have at times been offensive and personal, I understand that a lack of information leads to misunderstanding. And I have forgiveness and compassion for those individuals because I know that they just haven't been exposed to someone like me or the other beautiful LGBT persons who have testified over the last 3 days. I want to address a couple of issues that I believe work their way into a misunderstanding of what HB 2 is about. I want to talk about religious freedom, I want to talk about definitions, and I want to talk about equality. I've made it clear through the public testimony that I do not believe that one person or one denomination or one faith has the corner on the market of religious freedom. Your right to express religion freely starts when you wake up each morning, and so does mine. And your right to express your religion freely stops when you infringe upon my right to express my religion. And so does mine. We have competing forces in this argument, and both sides deserve to be treated equally and respectfully. And that is what HB 2 is about. With regard to definitions, we've heard the notion that the terms sexual orientation and gender identity are vague and ill-defined. But we've also used the term discrimination indiscriminately and caused it to be a term, we've caused a term that was once well-defined to now become ill-defined. Which way do we want? Do we want to prove that any word in the English language is subject to numerous, even countless, subjective definitions? As lawmakers, we should know that the law has its own set of definitions. Discrimination has been used in U.S. history, in federal law, in Idaho history, and in Idaho statutes in a particular way. It is codified in the U.S. civil rights laws, and it is codified in the Idaho Human Rights Act. When we as lawmakers discuss how vague definitions are, it should be in the context of the Idaho Constitution, the Idaho Code, and Idaho case law. With that in mind, I can't legally define discrimination, but I feel comfortable that we all know what discrimination is. The legal definition of sexual orientation, as it will be applied in HB 2, as was presented by the Idaho Human Rights Commission, is homosexuality, heterosexuality, and bisexuality. This bill is about equality, and no one is asking for special rights or for special treatment. Everyone is asking for equal rights and equal treatment under the law. I see my role as a lawmaker as one who makes the law. It's not my job to transform society. I don't need to make everyone like me. If I thought everyone should like me, I would never have run for public office. Everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, period. We have heard the heartbreaking stories about mothers losing their children to suicide because that child was gay or transgender. We've heard heartwarming stories about individuals who did not commit suicide due to the warmth of Idaho public servants, and as a result of that warmth, they committed their lives to positively changing the world around them. We've heard stories that touched our hearts, and our lives will be forever changed from hearing them. As a committee, we would do well to remember these stories as we cast our votes. Fellow committee members, in this committee, I have an equal vote. I have 1/17 of the vote on this panel, and I am treated equally here. And I appreciate that sense of equality. We are a citizen legislature, and in a few months, we will go back to our homes and our local communities. And I work in Boise, and Boise has a non-discrimination ordinance, and there are some protections that are afforded by that to me, some. I live, however, in Garden City, and if I go to a restaurant in Garden City that does not have a non-discrimination ordinance, the possibility does exist that I could be denied service simply because I walk in with my husband. And so I would ask you, as my fellow committee members, I ask you to remember the stories of the people that you've heard from, because they are me. When you go home, you will have all the freedoms that most people have. When I go home, I won't. And if we can get this piece of legislation through our legislature, then I will. I do want to say that if anyone casts a no vote on this bill, I will not take it personally. I know that some people have even campaigned that they would not support Add the Words. And I think it's important for you to honor that promise to your constituents. But I would ask you in the future not to campaign on that any longer. I would ask that if you have a constituent that asks you to oppose adding the words, I would ask you to tell them about me. I would ask you to tell them that you work with a very nice young man, and I hope you say young, who is well-spoken, articulate, intelligent, and he's gay, and there's nothing wrong with him. So I would encourage your support of the amended substitute motion that is on the floor to send House Bill 2 to the floor.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative McCrosty, thank you. You all but went ahead and named me there when you said that someone had made a campaign promise, and that is true. Throughout my discussions on this issue, as I have engaged with the LGBT community, I've let them know that when I was asked in a public forum if I would support Add the Words, I said no. And I believe in this process that your word is your bond. And when you make a promise, that you keep that commitment to your constituents and to the individuals with whom you made that promise to. So today, I will be supporting the original motion. One of the interesting discussions that took place yesterday for me in watching Representative Rubel as she presented the Attorney General's opinion, and watching a couple of other attorneys that I have great respect for as well debate this issue with Representative Rubel. And that's one of the concerns that I have with this particular piece of legislation. Definitions do matter. Words do matter. If you're going to add words, we need to know what those definitions are. The first question that I asked the presenter of this bill was, what is your definition of sexual orientation? To which he would not respond. He did not have an answer. I asked him if there is a place where he would draw the line with respect to sexual orientation. He said no. The ACLU attorney stood up here and said there are a dozen different interpretations that you can use. Lawyers love it when you do not define things, because then it is an avenue through which they can argue either side or for either position. I think in an issue that is as sensitive as this, definitions do matter. I think the people of Idaho, if we're going to add the words or talk about adding the words, they need to know what is sexual orientation and what is gender identity. And Representative McCrosty, I truly appreciate you identifying those for the committee today. But one of the problems that exists is that my interpretation of that could be potentially different. Another turning point for me in this debate, and I've spent a number of hours talking with members of the LGBT community, was I've noticed that there is a tension that exists between someone's rights based on their sexual orientation and gender identity and another's rights based on their sincerely held religious beliefs. I don't believe, as it's written, that House Bill 2 will solve that tension. I truly believe and feel that this bill, as it's written, will further reinforce that tension and not diminish it. So for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I will be supporting the original motion.
Further discussion on the motion? Representative Barbieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee and ladies and gentlemen, there's no question but the testimony here is heartbreaking. I can't deny the compassion that is stirred in me listening to these stories, and I certainly feel no animosity to anyone in the LGBT community. There's no question in my mind that persecution, violence, and abuse against the community, or any community, it needs to stop. Criminal behavior needs to stop. Laws haven't stopped that behavior. A change of the heart, of each heart, has to happen to stop criminal behavior. And to date, throughout mankind, that has not happened. This bill doesn't touch that part of personal behavior. It's important to recognize that each side in this discussion is talking past one another. There's no meeting of the minds possible because each side's values are couched in mutually exclusive terms. My words and explanation of my determination here on this issue will go unheard by many of you because, as I say, my values are couched in a terminology that is discounted by the proponents of this issue. The risk of using this amendment as a sword, which has been shown in many jurisdictions, rather than the shield that it has been designed or expected, is too great. These four words take no concern of citizens holding personal religious conscience, genuine personal religious conscience. The high risk of forcing individuals to act in opposition to their own personal values through the threat of examination by whatever institution, whether it's a commission or a court, with an agenda that is contrary to people of faith and people with their own convictions, is evident and should be evident to all. And although a majority of the LGBT community want nothing more than to be left alone, I get that, and be free to live their lives just like everyone else, it's impossible to ignore that there are many, whether in that community or otherwise, that have an agenda in this proposed policy that's dangerous to people of faith. You don't want to be recognized with certain elements of sexual perversity, but you must recognize that in crime there are predators, and those predators will use anything they want to use to continue their behavior. And we're talking about bathrooms and all these other issues that are really of no concern unless you're a predator and can use the loophole to continue your behavior. There are several issues that I have in this legislation, and there's no real reason to try and identify them. Suffice it to say that when we carve out protections to one group, rights are taken from another. It shouldn't need to be that way. Protections for all groups must be included in any legislation, in any legislative solution, and it's not present in this bill. I can't vote for this to send it to the House when I'm against it by principle. If we can work out some language that protects all people of faith and within this community, then I can support that. But it's not in this bill, and I cannot support this bill.
Further discussion on the motion? Going to give everybody a chance who hasn't said anything first. Is that okay? Representative Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reckon this touches my heart for several reasons, but probably for the biggest reason is this. I don't think there's a family in this area. Maybe there is on this committee, I don't know. But I don't think there's a family that's not touched by having a member of that family being a member of the group called LGBT. Now, I want to teach you or not teach you, but let you know how I was taught in being fair to all people. When I was a young boy, I never ever heard of these terms. It wasn't even talked about. But several other things were. I can still remember my mother reminding me that I had better not tease or poke fun at any child that went to school with holes in their clothes. Now that seems to be a norm today, but it was not a norm then. I did wear patches on the knees of my pants that my mother put there, but she was very adamant about that. She did say this: all people can keep their clothes clean. And she reminded me that I'd better keep mine clean, but I cannot poke fun at anybody else at all on that matter. I love to dance. I and my wife have been dance directors in our church most of our married life. We can't anymore because she's physically disabled to do that. But let me say to you this: when I was a boy in the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade at Hazleton, Idaho, we had dances. The 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Wright, would push back the chairs in the wintertime and teach us how to dance in the noon hour. Now, here's what I'm driving at. You know what my dad told me? Because we danced at our church, too. He said, "Son, if it ever comes back to me that you didn't dance with some of the girls that never get to dance, you're not going to a dance again." So I learned at an early age, I and my brother were responsible to go ask the girls that weren't popular, that had other problems, to dance first with them. Because my father said this to me. He says, if you'll do that, you'll find that other boys will go up and ask those girls to dance. That's the equality things that I was taught when I was a boy. That has not left my heart. Now, many people that have been testifying here on this matter, on both sides, have gone to the scriptures. And I am going to do that. myself. I'm not going to say verse and quote and all that, but I'll tell you what I've been taught by those. When a lady was threatened to be stoned by the Pharisees, the Savior happened to be in the area, and he was drawing marks in the dirt, and he was asked about the matter. You know what his response was? He who is without sin cast the first stone. Guess what? They all went away. Nobody could cast the first stone. But that wasn't the end of the matter with the Savior. He looked at the lady. He had offered her compassion and saved her life at that time. But what did he say? He said, "Go thy way and sin no more." He was willing to offer compassion and kindness and forgiveness, but he reminded her it was not a good thing to do. And I'm not saying to you folks that are in this community that that necessarily applies to you. I'm saying to you that's part of where I learned to be kind and helpful. Then there's one other story I'd like to tell you. The Savior was approached one time by a certain man, and I think he was a legal scholar. And he was asked, Master, or Rabbi, or the term, he was asked, in the law, which is the greatest law of all, trying to trap the Savior, because in the Old Testament days, and the New Testament had not been written yet, it was written later by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and a lot of Paul's writings, but not at that time. And you know what the Savior said to this young man, this person? He said, number one, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength, and without hesitation offered the second great commandment. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Folks, I can bear witness to you on this matter that as I've gone around and met people from all persuasions, even a different country here and there, studied history and done all those things, deep in the hearts of most citizens of the world community, they keep the golden rule, which comes from the second great commandment. And guess what the young man said to the Savior when he stated those things? Thou hast stated correctly. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. We, you and I, you're not going to legislate the things that I was taught when I was a kid. You can't legislate that. We have to learn how to teach that to our own kids, to our own families, and show that by example to the people around us. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm in favor and accept your lifestyles. I have a tough time doing that, but I'm reminded by the teachings that I've had that my obligation is to treat you as I would like to be treated, and I'm going to do that. I have done that. I can remember doing that when I was a kid. But for the very reasons this bill creates all the controversy that it does, there's absolutely no way that it's going to extend these rights to you. The only way that's going to happen is when everybody's mom and dad teaches their kids proper attitude towards other people, and we're willing to live that golden rule. Now, the Savior went on further, and he had the Sermon on the Mount, reinforced all of that. I will let you know right now that when I was campaigning and I had a real tough primary, this issue didn't come up one time. No, it didn't. I was never asked during the primary campaign anything about this matter. But I can tell you, since we started this hearing, my phone at home doesn't have any more room for messages. My computer is logged up, and all of those things from the people in my district. And guess what the count is? It's running over 9-1 against. So my constituents have let me know where they stand on the matter. And I'm from District 23, which is Elmore County, Owyhee County, and the west end of Twin Falls County. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot support only one of these motions, and that is the first motion. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion. Representative Luker.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know, the microphones in this place are all kind of lined up with each other, and it's hard to tell. Representative Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has been 21 hours of some very compassionate testimony, and I've listened to it all. But you know, the time that I spent on Idaho's Human Rights Commission taught me that mediation and compassion can be effective for both sides. I'm here, I'm sure that eventually the Idaho Human Rights Commission will be chosen to deal with this. But definitions do matter, especially when you have two sides. So, and I know that we can't ever legislate self-worth. That's something you build on every day. So I'll be voting to hold it in committee. But I'm sure that eventually we'll continue to listen and we'll continue to work, and the Human Rights Commission will deal with this. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion. Representative Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Nielsen, I think your parents and my parents might have gone to grade school together. I think I was raised very much similar to you, and those great values that you're discussing, treating each other with dignity and respect and kindness and care. And my mother was a Sunday school teacher, and she told me the same things. My friends are quite surprised when I can quote the Bible scripture pretty well. But the thing I'm struggling with is, as you said, if I were to practice religion and Christianity, Jesus isn't present with us only in our hearts and not present with us to stop others from harming us. And my mom isn't around to do that for me either. And I do think it's the government's responsibility to say who are the most vulnerable of our citizens and who needs that protection. As government leaders, we weigh decisions all the time. And as the professor in history stated, and I went and looked and did some history research last night with, the Republican's name was, it was Frank Church and, no, Len, is it Len? That's it, the Republican. Thank you. I can't believe I had a block on that. But what I really loved about her story is these two men in the heart of civil rights, the whole country at odds and upset and inflammatory things happening about black people in our country, these two men said, despite the number of opposed from Idaho voters, he said, they said this is the right thing to do. This is about our humanity. This is about human rights. And I believe that. I have said that always. I do not believe that human rights should be decided on a popular vote. Now, even so, even in our testimony, the yeses far outweighed the noes, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is human rights. And what is my role as a government official is to know that if people are vulnerable, how must I step in? Representative Barbieri talked about, this legislation wouldn't legislate kindness. We've all talked about that. But we have numerous laws in our society because we know that people aren't always kind. And so we need, as a government, I think, to weigh those things. And I think we do need to step in, allow this to get to the House, let everybody vote on it. It's a huge issue for our state. It's waited 9 years. Over 18 other states have these laws. District of Columbia, millions of people, thousands of businesses, and we're talking about 4 small cases that would be protected in our current legislation. So if it's a business, 5 of under religiously held beliefs, the photographer, the florist, the baker, they're covered. So I guess that's my last plea, to ask you to please vote and support, just to put it on the floor and let everybody else vote. No recommendation, just let it sit out there and let everybody else vote. That's my final plea, and I'll be quiet, Mr. Chair. Thank you for indulging me.
The discussion on the motion. Representative McCrosty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Only because it was brought up by, and I don't want to call anybody out because it's certainly not my intent, but Representative Nielsen had brought up the folks in his district, and I think we may have talked about this before. I grew up in Mountain Home, and I started my teaching career in Mountain Home. I'm sure that one of the things that we haven't talked about is one of the reasons why I left Mountain Home, because when I began my coming out process in understanding that I'm gay, I was afraid to tell anyone it was safe to drive from Mountain Home to Boise and meet people in Boise who were understanding and then go back to Mountain Home. But that whole drive back and forth, and you know what that drive is like and how boring that is, and that gets old after a while. People in Mountain Home aren't going to tell you anything because they're afraid. The men and women and transgendered persons who have testified before this body, they're courageous. And they represent so many people who are afraid to come into a public forum and to share those kinds of stories. I hope that this panel will remember the people who were not able to speak because they were afraid, and to keep that in mind as well as we cast our votes.
Further discussion on the motion. I'm going to do something that's just a little bit out of character for a chairman to do, but I've consulted Mason's manual before doing this. A chairman is also free to discuss any matter before the body. And for that reason, there are a couple of things that I'm impressed to say. First of all, we're past 22 hours now on this project. I've been stuck in this chair for that whole time, except for a half an hour that I was called to another meeting. So I have listened very diligently to both sides in this argument. I have to tell you that the first time, when I first came to this body, which was more than a couple of years ago, the first time in the House that I had to push that button to cast my vote, it hit me that I had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, that I was exposing myself to whatever criticism might come because of the votes that I may have taken. And over my years here, I can tell you that I've received a lot of criticism for votes that I have cast. That notwithstanding, I have to tell you that I will not try to tell you stories about the discrimination that I have experienced in my own personal life. But I will tell you that I've experienced that discrimination even at the hands of elected officials. Enough said about that. So I know all about this. I've experienced it most of my life. I was born overweight. I still are. And so I know what criticism comes my way because of that. But I've learned how to live with that, as many people who have been in these kinds of situations. The other thing I would like to tell you is that every member of this committee has changed because of this process. None of us here, as we've gone through this hearing, can honestly say that we have not been changed in our hearts and in our minds, because we all have. I don't know the right word to use when it comes to the cruelty that have been experienced by people who have testified here today. And I have to tell you that there's no excuse for that cruelty. And as the chairman of this committee, and as an Idahoan, and as a legislator, I'm calling on the people of this state to stop the cruelty. It has no place in our society. And as a result of that, I'm calling on people everywhere to get over themselves, get past all this, and to be less cruel, or more favorably stated, kind in your approach to people who you may perceive that are different from you. Just one last comment, and then we'll go on. A question was asked last night of me, and because it came up during our discussions last night and during our time here. If we should be concerned about the cost of what the ramifications are of legislation, should we even consider that? Out of my own personal experience, I don't think that it's appropriate for government or anyone to impose restrictions on people that will ultimately at some time force them to expend their treasure to defend themselves against government action or against actions of another. And that is why my discussion on this has everything to do with what is contained in this bill and what is not. I am certainly open to something that will work for the state of Idaho. This is not that bill. I think we need to consider very carefully the cost ramifications to all of our citizens as we approach legislation. We cannot ignore that in any way. And so for that reason, I'll be supporting the original motion. This is not the bill, but there is legislation out there that I think at some point I certainly can support. Is there further discussion on the motion? Representative Andrews.
I apologize for, I don't mean to trump you, and no will I, but there was one point that I forgot to make in support of the original motion, and it coincides with the remarks of Representative Crane, and was brought out in several testimonies that we heard. If we pass this legislation, in view of the incidents that have happened in other states, the florist in Washington, the photographer in New Mexico, the wedding cake baker in Colorado, and the situation at Evergreen State College, and the concern there is, if we pass this bill today as it is worded, I think that we're actually going to create a barrier between you folks who are in favor of adding these words and the so-called straight community, and it will be a giant step backwards, not a step forward. Consider that, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the amended substitute motion is to send House Bill 2 to the floor without recommendation. The Secretary will call the roll.
Archer?
No.
Pat? No. Representative Andrus?
No.
Representative Luker?
No.
Representative Crane?
No.
Representative Palmer?
No.
Representative Sims?
No.
Representative Barbieri?
No.
Representative Holtzclaw?
No.
Representative McMillan?
No.
Representative Bateman?
No.
Representative Cheatham?
No. No.
Representative Smith?
Yes.
Representative Jordan?
Yes.
Representative McCrosty?
On behalf of the LGBT.
In the House, we don't explain our votes. You got to do that while you were debating the issue.
Aye.
Representative Wintrow?
Yes.
Motion fails 13-4. The substitute motion is to send House Bill 2 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Is there further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the Secretary will call the roll.
Archer?
No.
Representative Bat? No. Representative Andrus?
No.
Representative Luker?
No.
Representative Crane?
No.
Representative Palmer?
No.
Representative Sims?
No.
Representative Barbieri?
No.
Representative Holtzclaw?
No.
Representative McMillan?
No.
Representative Bateman?
No.
Representative Cheatham?
No.
Representative Nielsen?
No.
Representative Smith?
Yes.
Representative Jordan?
Yes.
Representative McCrosty?
Aye.
Representative Wintrow?
Yes.
Motion fails 13-4. The original motion is to hold House Bill 2 in committee. Is there further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the Secretary will call the roll.
Chairman Larcher?
Aye.
Representative Bat?
Aye.
Representative Andrus?
Aye.
Representative Luker?
Aye.
Representative Crane?
Aye.
Representative Palmer?
Aye.
Representative Sims?
Aye.
Representative Barbieri?
Aye.
Representative Holtzclaw?
Aye.
Representative McMillan?
Aye.
Representative Bateman?
Aye.
Representative Cheatham?
Aye.
Representative Nielsen?
Aye.
Representative Smith?
No.
Representative Jordan?
No.
Representative McCrosky?
No.
Representative Wintrow?
Motion passes 13-4. Just one final word before we adjourn. We will not be meeting tomorrow, committee. I think you deserve a little rest. We do have some RSs. We'll need to meet Monday. We probably won't convene until 9 a.m. on Monday. And my thanks to all of you for your diligence in seeing this process through. And we do appreciate all those who participated in the process. If there's nothing further, we'll stand adjourned.